AB 108, higher education.
This represents the higher education omnibus trailer bill to implement the overall budget agreement. The bill appropriates $195 million, a one-time Proposition 98 general fund. Specifically, the bill includes $60 million for basic skills, $48 million for career tech education pathways program, $48 million for additional deferred maintenance and instructional equipment at the community colleges, and $10 million for a new basic skills partnership pilot program in conjunction with CSU. This also makes some changes to the middle class scholarship program, and that will result in savings about $70 million in the budget year that will grow over the next several years. There is also a expansion of the competitive Cal Grant program, providing an additional 3,250 new competitive Cal Grants, bringing the total number of competitive Cal Grants to 25,750. There's also a 2-year delay in the reductions to the nonprofit colleges, reductions in Cal Grants. There's a 2-year delay that's reflected in this budget. There's also $1 million that is set aside for a study, an eligibility study for our higher education system.
Thank you, Ms. Bosler. Colleagues, I think this is one of our greater successes in working with both houses and the administration. I think, well, we know with regard to expansion of enrollment at both the University of California and California State University, including our community colleges, we'll get to that though, beyond anything we've done in recent years. Ms. Bosler, have we ever had more than 25,750 Cal Grant awards before? Is this a high watermark for us?
Christian Osmani with finance. I don't have the actual number in front of me, but the number of competitors has fluctuated over time.
So we have been higher than this?
I believe we have been higher.
Okay, so we've got more work to do, but certainly making some positive ground on that. Senator Block.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is, AB 108 is an area where the two houses have really exhibited great cooperation and the administration supporting this cooperative effort to use existing revenues to repurpose some middle-class scholarship dollars that the CSU and others found to be not used to their maximum potential, and to take these dollars and use them instead to hire more faculty, to hire more student service employees, to help students graduate in 4 years, to do more with Cal Grants, make more dollars available to students, to make basically the CSU and UC more efficient and effective to get students in and out more quickly, so that the community college students and high school graduates behind them could now have spaces in the CSU and UC. So basically in AB 108, we open the doors to many more students, make our institutions of higher education much more effective without having to add any additional revenue, just by repurposing dollars already budgeted. So I commend the Assembly and Speaker Atkins, as well as our own leader, Pro Tem De Leon, and the Governor for working cooperatively for a really good result in AB 108.
Thank you, Senator Block, for your generous comments, also modest comments, because I think if it had not been for your introduction with Pro Tem De Leon, SB 15, I don't know that we'd be here today with the success that we've had. So we appreciate your efforts. Senator Nielsen.
Mr. Chairman, this is a very worthy of an aye vote. I'd argue to my colleagues. Just a couple of quick observations. The baccalaureate degree pilot project, I certainly do support that, but I must confess reservations about how far I would see the community college going in granting baccalaureate degrees. We do not need to have them become 4-year schools, and so we need to be a little cautious about how far we go. This is a step, and that's appropriate. I also do appreciate the master plan review of are we meeting the master plan requirements in terms of the admission of California students. You know, that's been historic since the early 60s. It's served us well, and it'll give us a benchmark to see to what degree we're taking care of our own first. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Nielsen. Ms. Bothell, I do have a question for you. Not unlike last year, we are now delaying, in this case, 2 years, any reduction in the maximum amount of the Cal Grant A and B for private nonprofits. I think we've all recognized in our former action and the one proposed here, the great benefit to the state of these not-for-profit private schools. Why would we only delay it for another 2 years? At what point do you think we might agree that they serve a purpose, they deliver a product at a cost that is difficult for us as a state to compete with at times, and they're helping us to carry our burden to make sure that we do have a sufficient number of qualified graduates for our workforce? What was the argument for another 2-year delay?
I think the overall budget package reflects many compromises. The concern that the governor has about the budget year and the ensuing years is really maintaining the balance that the state has worked so hard to achieve. And so in order to maintain that balance over the next several years, I think there needs to be flexibility built in to be able to address any shortfalls in revenues that might occur.
I think I remember a quote of his from the other day that he hates cutting programs that he likes, and so taking step by step, he may not have to face that. Any other questions from the committee? Do we have any public comment? I don't see any. We have a motion by Senator Block. This is our higher education trailer bill, AB 108. Roll, please.
Leno?
Aye.
Leno, aye. Nielsen?
Aye.
Nielsen, aye. Allen? Allen, aye. Anderson? Aye. Anderson, aye. Bell? Bell, aye. Block? Block, aye. Hancock? Hancock, aye. Mitchell? Mitchell, aye. Monning? Monning, aye. Morlock? Morlock, aye. Wynn? Wynn, aye. Pan? Pan, aye. Pabley? Pabley, aye. Roth? Roth, aye. Stone? Stone, aye. Wolk? Wolk, aye. 16-0.
16-0. Colleagues, I'm going to ask, that bill is out. I'm going to ask that we return to the last 4 items, starting with AB 104, moving on to 05, 6, and 7, so we can close the roll on each of those. So starting with AB 104, if you could call the missing members, please.
Mitchell, aye. That's 15-1.
15-1 on AB 104. AB 105, call the absent members, please.
Mitchell? Mitchell, aye. That's 15-0.
15-0?
Yes. Right? 15-0. Oh, Nielsen. I'm sorry, Nielsen. 16-0.
16-0 on AB 105. Call the absent members, please, on AB 106.
Nielsen?
Aye.
Nielsen, aye. Mitchell? Mitchell, aye. 13-3.
13-3. And lastly, AB 107, call the absent members, please.
Mitchell? Mitchell, aye. 15-1.
15-1. All right, we're all caught up. AB 109, developmental disabilities.
This trailer bill represents the compromise on programs for the developmentally disabled. Overall, there are many provisions of this bill. Many of them are really intended to support the transition of individuals from the developmental centers into community facilities by removing some of the barriers for the development of those community-based facilities for some of the individuals in developmental centers that are a bit more challenging to place in the current residential center system. So many of, there's enhanced behavioral support homes, removing the limitation on the number of those homes, also eliminating a requirement of federal funds eligibility for delayed egress homes, as well as the big part of our May revision, which was the plan to close the developmental centers. And there is a plan due to the legislature by October 1 of this year related to the dates on closure. Also, there's increased transparency about the savings that will accrue from closing the developmental centers that will be required to be reported in the January and May budget estimates as well. And so it also clarifies that residents in the developmental centers are also eligible for a new, more flexible program called the Self-Determination Program that we are just in the beginning stages of implementing and are still working with the federal government on a waiver related to that program. But this also gives additional flexibility for those individuals transitioning to the community.
Very good. I don't know that we need to restate some of our earlier comments, but I did want to just dig in a little bit further with regard to the developmental center closures and savings. So we now have a plan, and as Senator Pavley pointed out, as did Senator Mitchell, we want to make sure that those savings, and I know that they are not immediate savings, that there are fixed costs as we wind down, that there will need to be personal plans for every individual served, that it will take a while and there will be expenses, and in fact there might even be some additional expenses as we make the transition to full community services for this community. If you could give us a little more clarity as to when we might begin to receive or realize some of those savings, and also what the administration's vision is as to where we find the funds, irrespective of any potential and certainly intended increases in reimbursement rates, but just to deal with the additional workload and additional costs of the closure process, at the same time keeping an eye on our community infrastructure to make sure that we don't see, and I know Senator Bell has spoken so often of the number of services that are closing in our communities as we speak, that we wouldn't want to get to the end of the multi-year closure process of the developmental centers only to turn around and realize we did not sufficiently invest in the community, and now where will we be?
Yes, the resources in the community are absolutely key and foundational to the administration's ability to close the developmental centers. There is $47 million really for the development of additional community services in the Northern California area to support the closure of the Sonoma Developmental Center, which is the first of the remaining developmental centers slated for closure. There is going to need to be a great monitoring by the state in terms of the overall facilities available in the regional centers to ensure that the transition of those individuals from the developmental centers to the community is seamless. There has been a significant growth in utilization of services at the regional center level. Just in the current year, the budget was underestimated by nearly $200 million. So the additional expenditures in the regional center is something that we continue to look at. Just in the last 2 years, the regional center budget has grown by about 30%. So there's clearly a lot of change going on at the local level. The provision of autism services as part of a managed care benefit has been a big change to the system. There's still a lot of things that need to be worked out about how that's being implemented and how the regional center system works directly with the managed health care plans. There's a lot of work to do. The administration has started a task force that's been meeting most of this year to discuss the issue of rates and also discuss, has other issues slated for discussion. But really, the provision of these services to a very vulnerable community is a partnership between the state and the regional centers and their network of providers. And so that's something we're committed to continuing to work through the access issues and other issues that arise.
Thank you for that overview. Senator Pavley, I just wanted to bring your attention to some intent language. And Ms. Bosler, I don't think we've put this into statute before. Intent language that says, it is our intent that the general fund savings derived from the closure of state developmental centers benefit persons with developmental disabilities living in the community. So it is, yes, just intent language, but on the other hand, I don't think we've ever put it into law before, that is what we intend to do as we come closer to those closures. I'm sure you have a response to that. Go right ahead.
Well, ideally, it would be not just the intent of the closure, but the sale of the proceeds of those properties. Because what we're facing now, I think for many, and many as you know, about 1 out of every 100 children born in the last 10 years or so are diagnosed with being somewhere on the autism spectrum disorder list. And we're seeing a growing need as early intervention has served us well. And the struggle, frankly, in the schools, on special education, not getting adequate funding from the state and not being included under the local control funding formula, where we have a hole there. But the number of young adults coming out of the system who are severely autistic, not just high-functioning Asperger's, there have been very successful supported work programs with no salary increases for years and years and years, where the turnover is huge. We have private sector employees actually stepping up and providing work experience in their places of businesses, from Amgen to Wood Ranch and a variety of others, and thank goodness for them. But if you don't have the supervisor through the payments through the regional center to these nonprofits that are implementing these service programs, not being implemented by the regional center, they're under contract, programs like PathPoint, if you don't have that trained supervisor with them, the experience is diminished, and potentially the place of employment no longer wants to employ these workers. Work experience is incredibly important, not only for the dignity of the person, but contributing to society. So there is a severe lack of really the acknowledged and acceptance of the vast increased number of young adults and eventually old adults that will live in their homes as long as they can, but then there's no place to go. There is no supported housing. There hasn't been any increase in years. We're not increasing supported work programs. You're on waiting lists. And so this is a crisis you can't ignore. It's going to need additional funding. And if the general fund is off limits, what are the choices? So I would suggest to you, the only thing I can think of right now, why not? As we have invested in early intervention for younger children diagnosed with autism or other kinds of afflictions, what happens after you're out of school and there's no places in these supported work programs or supported housing? So I think it's a collective responsibility to deal with this.
Thank you, Senator. I'm glad you made mention of the private employers who are stepping up to the plate and partnering.
They're amazing.
They are. I know in San Francisco, at the Arc of San Francisco, there's a major and very successful program working with larger employers and medium-sized employers as well. And also, the Arc is now partnering with affordable housing developer so that there will be...
These supervisors get maybe minimum wage,
Yeah.
haven't had an increase for 8 years. The turnover, and if you're autistic, change is not easy. It's a real big problem.
Yeah.
And this is a population that's not driving. It's going to have to rely on public services too. So big challenges ahead.
Yes, I think we all recognize right now we're relying on the creativity and generosity of angels rather than taking care of things ourselves. We have Senator Morlock, then Senator Monning, and Senator Roth.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The Fairview Development Center is in my district. In fact, it's just a block or two from my home. So I found out that this had a big target on its back the first day I showed up here in Sacramento with Senator Stone's bill and also Assemblywoman Shannon Grove. So there were just a couple of thoughts as this progresses. One is, how does the senator and the Assemblyman Matt Harper, stay involved so we can be updated on this project? But two, the one of the concerns we have is moving everyone into group homes. We're using the term here, community-based services, but that the connotation is group homes, and my cities are having a real difficult time with group homes, especially related to alcoholic treatment homes, especially in Newport Beach and Costa Mesa. So
The siting of properties.
I'd like to know what that means, and am I trading one expensive problem for multiple, disruptive problems? So I'd kind of like to be educated as this process moves along.
I will let Ms. Bosler answer this as well, but I know that minimally, we will be getting quarterly reports. Your office will as well.
Treatment facilities primarily.
Yes. So there will be reports, but Ms. Bosler, if you'd like to follow up.
Teresa Calvert with Department of Finance. As the chair mentioned, there are quarterly developmental center legislative staff briefings that we can definitely provide information on. And then we can also ask the department for more information about the community placement plan funds that Ms. Bosler mentioned earlier, which is the money that is in the budget to help with the transition of Sonoma. If you're interested in the types of homes and the types of facilities that they'll be funding through that, we can get more information on that.
That'd be very helpful. Thank you. Thank you.
Certainly, Senator. Senator Monning and then Senator Roth.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I just need clarification. My understanding is in our conference committee, out of sub 3 and then conference committee, we had language that would require that proceeds from the sale of any of the developmental center properties would follow into the community to support the members of the community being transitioned. Am I correct? Has that been eliminated in the budget before us?
The language has been modified and so that it is going to be very clear what the savings are, as we will be required to report in January, and then also again in May revision about what the updated savings numbers are. So those savings numbers are absolutely public, and the transparency is something that the administration specifically has agreed to, but in terms of really tying up the money, that was not agreed to. But that will certainly be a choice that when we put a budget forward in January and in the coming years, as we get closer to closing the developmental centers, that will be part of the conversation.
Well, I appreciate the clarification because that wasn't absolutely clear to me. Again, I think the thinking of the legislature was it's the logical revenue source to dedicate to a community that we're not cutting them off from support, and that it's a logical connection. So I will look forward to continuing. The transparency only gets us to telling us what is the savings or what are revenues from sales. That should be in the public record, and you're underscoring that that will be in the public record. But the next step of that equation is committing a source of funding to the community. So we will continue to monitor that, and I would hope, Mr. Chair, that would also be a legitimate topic in the special session conversations as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Monning. Senator Roth.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I've been concerned about the surplus property disposal process anyway, both with the Department of General Services and certainly in the developmental center arena. We tried some language with respect to property disposal plans. I think that was modified as well in Budget Subcommittee 4. So frankly, I look forward to continuing to have the discussion with the administration as we move forward into the next budget year of not only having surplus property disposal plans, but also having some discussion about depositing the money from the sale of surplus property into a surplus property disposal fund to be reviewed and appropriated as part of the normal annual appropriation process. So we have money from the sale of the surplus property in a designated and specifically named fund that is subject to appropriation as part of the annual legislative budget process. So I look forward to having that discussion. I think that will go at least partway to addressing some of the concerns of my colleagues, and we can then have a discussion as to how the money is used, and particularly in the communities. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
I'm sure there are others, since I have questions myself, who are listening, who may not exactly understand the process. If we could even just take 5 minutes or so, I think it might be beneficial that we have a plan. Let's say, we can talk about Sonoma. The steps that are involved from where we are now to where we intend to be, which is to close it, where there might be savings along the way short of selling the property, because as the population decreases, yes, we acknowledge there will be fixed costs, but I'm sure there are also savings parallel to those fixed costs. We've already heard there will be transparency. It will be clear what those savings are along the way, so there will be an X number of dollars. With intent language included in this bill, it is then understood, and I ask this sincerely, not rhetorically, it is understood that when those monies are identified as savings, they will go to the community. There will be no debate about it. It is our intent. Once we identify those savings, they will go to the community. We don't have to redebate this. That's my question.
So I will have one of my colleagues walk through the existing surplus property disposal process. I think that the intent language specifically talks about the savings derived from the closure of the developmental centers. So I think that we understand the intent behind that, and definitely we'll look forward to working with the legislature about how to go forward and implement that as we do move forward to close those developmental centers.
And before we get to the issue of the property, there must be operational savings along the way. Let's say if we're at 100%, if we call status quo 100% population, and a couple years from now at Sonoma we're down to 20% of the 100%, there has to be some operational savings there. First question is, those savings will be identified, and secondly, those savings will go to the community.
The savings we know from our Lanterman experience, the recent closure of Lanterman Developmental Center, that there are those operational savings, mostly in the form of staff costs. As the population reduces, you'll have fewer staff serving the developmental center residents. And so that's one of the operational costs, but don't want to lose sight of the fact that there are those fixed costs to run the center and to run these large campuses. And I also want to note that the plan for Sonoma will be out October 1st, 2015, and that includes a number of considerations in developing that plan, one of which is consideration of recommendations for the property and conferring with the county. So it's actually a few more items for consideration than were present during the Lanterman closure plan. So wanted to note that as well.
Okay, and I do see in the trailer bill that it says all general fund savings or gains reasonably associated with the downsizing or closure of a developmental center. So I want to focus on the downsizing as well as the actual closure.
I think the downsizing would be those operational costs. Again, we saw that with Lanterman, that there was a reduction along the way.
Okay. Shall we hear about the property issue, and then no, go right ahead, Senator Pan.
So I have to admit, I did not hear an answer to Senator Leno's question, a straightforward answer. Is the answer yes or no? Does all the money that comes from both downsizing and closure, if it's just downsizing, those savings you just talked about are going to stay with the DD community? I just want to hear a very straightforward answer to that.
The money will go into the general fund. I think the language, the way it is written, says that it is the intent of the legislature. I think we understand that. And as we go forward, it will be very clear what the savings is, because that's going to be because that will be required to be reported in the budget documents at both January and the May revision. And so that will all be a conversation during every budget going forward.
So I understand the very conservative approach that the Department of Finance continues to take, and you're consistent. Minimally, you're consistent. But I just want to make it very clear, I don't think I'd have any disagreement with anyone here today, that as we identify, and you said there will be transparency, we will have identified savings through the downsizing process before we get to the closure. Just logistically, the money goes into the general fund. But given that we are putting in language, it is our intent that those monies follow the community, that if we do not see that in the governor's budget, we will put this front and center and make it clear that we expect consistency, because we've been around this block too many times. We're going to get to the issue of the property, if you could, and then see if there are any other questions from the committee. Thank you, Senator Pan.